Thanks for tuning in to the HR Uprising podcast. I'm your host, Lucinda. The HR Uprising is focused on helping forward-thinking people professionals deliver real lasting value in their organisations. I'm a chartered psychologist, speaker and trainer, and recently authored the best-selling business book, How to Be a Change Superhero. My day job is founder and CEO of software and training business Actus. This gives me the opportunity to work with other businesses like yours. We are focused on building a better workplace for people wherever they are located, with the help of our performance, learning and talent management software and our training and consultancy services. Every week on the podcast, I will be covering different topics and challenges, joined by relevant experts and real-life people professionals. Thank you so much for tuning in. I really hope you enjoy and get value from this week's episode. Hello and welcome to this week's HR Uprising podcast, and I'm really pleased that we're having a guest return this week. So we've been doing our high performance series for a while, but now I've got Julie Kratz join me. Some of you may remember her name. In fact, I was just saying to her that it was post our last podcast that I understood the importance of being inclusive and the use of using pronouns. So I started using that on my email. But we're not going to talk about pronouns. What we're really here to talk about is allyship. So Julie is an allyship researcher, and by allyship it's supporting other, well, I might get you to define it because I'm thinking about it in terms of supporting women, but it's being inclusive, I think, in large ways. She's an allyship researcher, author, speaker and podcast host, and it's a very interesting time, as Julie is based in the States, to be looking at this topic, but we won't get political. But certainly it would be great to hear more about her most recent book, which is all about allyship and power, the role that people with power have and can bring to this. So Julie, over to you if you would like to expand a little bit further, and then let's go into understanding more about your most recent research.
Yeah, it is an interesting time to study allyship, and you defined it beautifully. It's really supporting somebody that's different from you, has a different lived experience, has a different background, maybe joins you from another part of the world, another culture. And so it's really important right now that we broaden the conversation around inclusion beyond just race and gender, as you said. There's so many facets of diversity. And what I stumbled upon in my kind of shock of the events politically in the United States last year was that there was just this really stark realization that a lot of people weren't on board with this work, that we thought all these great DEI books had come out over the pandemic and everyone was on board and making their proclamations. And what I think the election revealed, and just kind of how the pushback and the backlash to our work has exposed, is that people with power, positional power, social power, influence, all sorts of different aspects of power, they didn't realize that they were necessary to this conversation. And so that's what I set out to do, is really research that question: what will it take? What will it take to engage people with power in a conversation that we absolutely need them to be a part of? And I found a lot of really interesting people that had also studied power and allyship and inclusion. So I spent 50 hours interviewing folks and found a plethora of existing secondary research as well, to kind of build on that theory. So I'm excited to talk more about it.
Yeah, and we will talk. I mean, I've got to say, I'm quite shocked for you in terms of the environment that you're having to think about this in, because of course my cogs I've thought about all the impact on DEI initiatives and all the things that have come in since the election. That's interesting because it almost feels like the people with power politically want to shut it down, as they feel threatened by inclusion and equality. Is kind of, from the outside, is the way it looks. So I'm really keen to hear about the positives of the research that you're finding there, but it does seem a bizarre way for powerful people to react. It feels like they're being threatened by it. I don't know if that's something you found or not, or how that's one of the things we're going to talk about. Is obviously it'd be great to hear the research and also your chapters in your book, and also strategies that we can do to maybe make sure people don't feel threatened, if that is the thing, so that they come on board.
Yeah, absolutely. No, you hit it. The one, there's really three main fears. So I open up the book, chapter 1 is using fear as fuel as an ally. 70%. So 70% of white men, and when they were interviewed and surveyed, found that they did not think that conversations around diversity and inclusion were meant to include them. The word include, kind of seems
Yeah.
kind of funny that that didn't signal that. They thought it was for everyone else, not for them. Well, you think about C-suites, most global companies ran out of the United States, 70% white male. And so there's this juxtaposition of, I don't think I'm supposed to be involved, but I'm also the main leader of the company. And so there are three fears that I found. One was status threat. So, great hypothesis there with the word threat, that I'm going to lose my status, that there's going to be less seats at the table for me, kind of that zero-sum game mentality. Also, the fear of irrelevance, that I'm going to be less relevant and people with diverse backgrounds are going to be more relevant. And so, kind of this loss aversion, where we overly focus on loss instead of what we stand to gain. And there's actually a lot more we stand to gain by being inclusive than being exclusive. I have yet to meet a leader that wants to be exclusive. Um, and then really this all risk, no reward. I'm going to put myself out there. And there's some career collateral involved in conversations where you're sponsoring folks different than you. You're taking chances on folks that may have very different backgrounds than you. And so it feels like I'm having to do a lot not to get a lot back in return. And so helping people kind of make it less transactional and emphasizing not just the benefits to you personally, but the benefits to your organization. There's a great business case. It's been proven time and time again, but I often center on the human case, Lucinda. One of my favorite findings in the research was Harvard did this really long study from like the 1940s on happiness. And their research question was, what are the variables that are highest correlated with happiness? And they found in their research time and time again, it was the quality of relationships. And that doesn't mean just your family and your friends, but workplace relationships too. We know when you have friends at work, when you have social relationships at work, you're happier at work, you're more productive at work, you're more innovative at work. And so, this whole idea that allyship is about building relationships, I think is what we really need to center in the narrative.
And the upshot is actually you're going to feel better, be happier, more engaged. It's a positive thing to do. It's interesting, those fears. Two of them are really kind of selfish, all about me, right? So it's sort of I'm less relevant or taking away my power. So it's kind of scarcity mentality thinking. And the other one is all risk, no reward, is more about kind of, I suppose, pragmatic and how much energy is this going to take, kind of being, and it's not, look, none of them really are looking at what's the good thing to do or values or the bigger picture of things, are they? But I mean, I guess that's what fears are. They can be quite narrow.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. So one day thinking about the human benefit and the happiness thing. It's randomly I've just been listening to another podcast which is talking about AI and the long-term impact. And it was almost saying that we could end up that human relationships are the differentiator in the end, in terms
Yeah.
of everyone's on a level. If suddenly the AI knows everything, and actually I could see that people would be fearful of that in the same way, because is it taking away your power? Is it taking away your relevance if suddenly everything is done by AI? But that's another conversation. It just feels it's an interesting alignment. So in terms of, you've kind of approached this particular, you've got lots of writing on allyship, but this particular, your most recent book, and we'll put links to this in the show notes if people want to look at Julie's work and listen to her podcast. Tell me a bit about the book and how you sort of worked through this.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the fears piece is really self-centered, but in times of change, we are very selfish creatures, and this is change. Issues of inclusion is a cultural shift inside an organization. I think managing it like we would any organizational change is key. So, what I found after the fears, really was the other key finding from the research was that people with power don't recognize their power. They were very quick to dismiss it. Oh, well, I'm, a senior leader in an organization, I see in my title, but what do I have to contribute to this? What could I possibly do? And or people just not realizing like dominant group identities. The more you are look and act like the C-suite leader that again is predominantly white male, the more you have proxy to power. And I walk people through, there's a number of exercises, and I think, probably listeners, you've heard about privilege walks and all sorts of stuff. I'm not a huge fan of those, but I do like the idea of helping people take an introspective look at their sources of power. And identity is part of that. Our cultural values is a part of that. There's some great frameworks I leverage from the Cultural Intelligence Center, from IDI, that has kind of a change curve to walk people through how you go from, being completely unaware to being an ally. And it really starts with just recognizing that power, unpacking your fear, and then really the first step that I offer is really building your allyship why. Like, why do you want to be helpful to other people? And again, there's the happiness data, there's business case data, but I actually think one of the most compelling reasons is as human beings, we're a social species. We are meant, our very survival has depended on our collaboration with one another. This is why loneliness is like actually like can kill people
Yes,
because we're not
yes.
meant to be by ourselves. And so, wouldn't you want to be helpful to someone else? Like that social influence that you build, it's not, we're not giving to get, but it feels awfully good to be helpful to somebody. Like I think back on my career and the times when someone took a chance on me. The times when I took a chance on someone else, the time when I had like a breakthrough coaching conversation with one of my employees, those are the things that I really remember. Those are the accomplishments I'm most proud of. And so I really think it's important that we do some introspective work before we dive into the proverbial deep end of allyship. And we saw a lot of that performative allyship in the years past where people dove in without really thinking about what's in it for me. Like, why am I going to continue to show up, especially when it's hard, especially right now? And if you have a solid why, and you kind of think about intentionally what are the consistent actions you want to take over time, it doesn't become this like bolt-on thing that we remove when times get tough. It becomes embedded in the organization's behavior and their values and how they view leadership.
God, my brain's whirring away at this at the moment. I was just trying to think why people, and we're sticking with white men, but let's say a white female, anyone can have privilege. And there's something about being a leader in the organisation. Do people see that there's a responsibility comes with the leader, and that it could be someone of colour or diverse person who's made it to the C-suite is even more powerful as to ally for others, right? To be able to recognise it and model it. But it just intrigues me as one of the things that I think we have to be careful of, and thinking of my audience, which is generally HR professionals and this sort of things, is not making people feel guilty. There's almost like they don't want to be introspective. I mean, I've got a daughter and a son, and it's one of those things where you don't want the sons to they just because there's been a kind of generations and generations, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't feel guilty for this. It's
Right.
just how things have been, and what we want is it to be safe for people to say, oh, actually I can see that I have had some advantages there, let me try and pay it back, right, in terms of there. But I'm also thinking that of my friends and colleagues that are in senior roles, I don't know, is it more, one of my really good friends is a partner in a big global company, and she gets so much out of mentoring others up there, and she really finds it personally fulfilling, and she's doing an amazing job mentoring other females to become partners and things like that. Now she has had mentors, but it's I just wonder whether it's just not modeled as well, the sort of connection. It's been more dog eat dog, so maybe people feel like no one ever helped me. So I'm just wondering what the
Yeah.
mentality is as to why it's not, people don't necessarily want to do it so much. I occasionally see it with men that go, well, I've got a wife and I've got daughters and I don't want them to, so that's a why for some of them, right? But I'm
Yeah, I kind of
intrigued.
I kind of tease on that one. It's like, okay, there's other reasons too. Like I'm glad you have a daughter and you've seen things firsthand, but there are other contexts we can bring in. But yeah, that's a gateway. That's often a first entry point for men in the conversation is having a daughter or their partner experiences something they might not experience and they kind of have this awakening moment. But you're right, like shame, blame, guilt, like this is not helpful. That's not a good allyship entry point. So I talk about power as it's a chance to be an ally. Like this is an invitation. Like this is power is not bad. It's what you do with it that
Yeah.
matters. And so don't you want to be on the good side of history? Like, don't you want to be the one that's standing up to social issues, even if it doesn't impact you? The other theme that you touched on that I actually perfect dovetail to the kind of second section of the book, once people do that introspective work, is individually as we move on to teams. And one of the behaviors that I found to be very correlated with success was modeling. Modeling is one of our best teachers as leaders. If we're not doing it, then we can't expect other people to be doing it. But modeling's not enough. One piece of data that I really loved is that modeling plus storytelling. So I can model the behavior, and you could be like, yeah, that's great for Julie, but that doesn't really work for me and my style. But what if I told you a story in addition to that, that you could kind of see yourself in and kind of choose your own adventure with that story? So, this storytelling component, much like the female partner you were mentioning, if we want that behavior to be contagious, modeling it herself, showing that she's mentoring, but then also maybe telling some stories to her male colleagues about the experiences she's having with junior women so that they think, maybe I should do this too, rather than like, make a requirement, some organization like you have to reverse mentor so many people. I don't find that to be as helpful as people wanting to join the conversation from a
Yeah.
place of genuine interest.
Make it desirable and actually saying how fulfilling it is, and so share that insight and value of it. I mean, I think back to a business I used to work in, and there was a handful of so there's one guy who was a fantastic mentor. Everybody therefore wanted him. He just modeled it. He was a real people's person and really good, but it was few and far between in that sort of environment there.
Mhm.
So you were saying about taking it into teams. So is that what you're saying in terms of talking to others about it, getting those examples, sharing, getting people talking about things?
Yeah. Yeah. In addition, so I talk a lot about psychological safety and perspective taking, which again, the twofer, I think a lot of workplaces know about psychological safety, mental well-being at work, feeling safe, bringing up hard things and taking risks, which is painfully low in most organizations right now, especially with all the AI and everything going on.
Yeah,
But when you partner it, when you pair psychological safety with perspective taking, which means kind of being curious to take on the perspective of someone else. And if someone's different than you, they're probably going to have different perspectives. So if you can pair those together, MIT Sloan found that that is exponentially higher and impact those two behaviors. So that's one of the chapters. I have a storytelling chapter, much like we talked about with modeling and storytelling. But the other actionable piece is walking people through how to build out your ally role. So I use an umbrella image that tends to really resonate with folks. Whenever I post on social media, it always gets, a lot of views. Not as many views as it used to get, but it still gets a lot of views. And
I've just
it,
let me explain that because I've got a lot of US audience who'll probably understand, but I have a lot of UK audience who may not understand.
yeah,
Julie is pointing out that the algorithms in the States appear to be consciously restrict.
suppressing.
What do you
Yes.
say? What's the word for you?
They're
Sorry.
suppressing
They're
certain voices.
suppressing, which is
Yeah.
really quite scary out there in terms of the sort of thing that's good, the allyship messaging that's going out, the positive stuff is being squeezed,
Yep.
and not the other way, which I don't think we have that kind of cynicism. The algorithms are there, but I don't think in that same political way at the moment. What do I
Yeah.
know? But
What,
I do. But that
and
sounds
I can give
really,
you a
really
great
true.
example. Yeah.
Go on, please.
Yeah, because Lucinda, yeah, it's interesting. I have a lot of clients in Europe that are very curious about what's happening here.
Yes,
I just want to like dispel,
shocked actually.
yeah, it's weird what's happening there. Like we're full steam ahead with our allyship programs and inclusion programs. So I'm actually getting more interest overseas, but most Americans don't want this. I mean, attitudinally, most people, when you ask, do you want to see diversity and inclusion as a good thing? It's like, yeah, it's a fact, and inclusion is a good thing. So most of us don't have these negative sentiments. There is a subset, though, like 10% naysayers that are really, really loud and obnoxious right now and have a large amount of power and wealth in our country right now. So there's a little bit of
Yeah.
hoarding behavior happening.
And don't
But
tell me the social media algorithms that make them louder.
exactly, when those are the people running the social media companies, and I really thought LinkedIn was a safe place. But in the past 2 months, since January 20th, I have seen my social impressions drop not just like 100%, I mean, they're like 10 times lower. So, an example I'd give you is the umbrella image I use where I talk about allyship roles with mentorship, sponsorship, coaching, challenging, and advocacy. I shared that 2 years ago, I think, for the first time and had 25,000 impressions. Same image shared last week with updated content on my research, so a little bit, different text with it. I believe I got 2,000 impressions. So there is a suppression that's happening. And many LinkedIn influencers are leaving the platform for places like Substack or podcasts or writing their own content somewhere else because it's really become a place of suppressed voices. And so you can still find, the people and content. If you keep liking them, you're going to see them, but you're not going to have as broad of a reach, even with hashtags inclusion. Certainly not DEI. That's one that's being flagged. So just something to be
Is that
cautious
what you
about.
think? So
Glad
there's
that's
certain
not
terms like that
happening.
actively being flagged. So
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
Quite,
Weird,
yeah.
weird times.
Very strange. So, well, people, if you're listening to this and you want to, what you do, I think make sure you do search Julie out and click these links because you can look at these things. And I just feel that's incredibly, incredibly backwards, isn't it? But carry on then. So keeping the abundance mentality as opposed to the scarcity mentality that's going on over there, and having the faith that it will eventually work through. Just give me a couple more points about where you've gone into the tips in your book, and then what I'd really love to move on to is a few of the practical strategy. I mean, you've sort of touched on things like storytelling and examples. And actually, do you know what? I mean, even what's going on here, what is going on, people are being suppressed. Well, actually, then all the more reason to galvanize. If you are somebody who's moderate and wants to be fair and has an abundancy mentality, thinks win-win in an organization, all the more reason to demonstrate allyship.
Yeah.
Maybe it can be used to your advantage over there in terms of motivating people.
Yeah.
For our broad audience as HR, because HR don't always have the power, they tend to work with the people with the power. Obviously, we do have power and influence. Um, Talk to me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it was important to me that in our work, we talked about individual actions and systemic actions. And so it was important for me that the book covered that kind of canvassed both across that spectrum. And so the middle chunk about storytelling and psychological safety is really for your team, since most people are leading teams that are in power. And then the last subset is around organizational change. So really, again, thinking about how to embed these activities into your culture. One of the things we build are allyship programs within organizations. And so there's kind of a 5-step process, as much like any, Six Sigma or research-based project process. We start with the research. What is the business problem we're trying to solve? What are the skill gaps? We take an inventory and kind of build out the content that's very customized to the cohort of leaders. And so, for example, I'm running a program with Amazon where we've now trained close to 200 leaders around the world around allyship behaviors, understanding biases, understanding sources of power, knowing their ally role, etc. So it's an iterative program that takes a few months to go through, but that I found to have tremendous data associated with it. So we do pre-knowledge checks and behavior checks and post assessments as well. And so we can compare data points and see the progress of the individual learners and bubble that up cumulatively. So we're seeing, a 20-30% lift in their ability to practice these behaviors, which is great. So allyship programs are a big fan of. Also inclusive policies. So HR folks, things like caregiving leave is a really big deal. Things like pay equity, super big deal. Most organizations have not gotten these things right, especially here in the United States. It's a competitive advantage. And then one of the things that's really a hot topic, and I think this is where we got DEI wrong a little bit, is this whole perception of the DEI hire, right? And first
Right.
of all, if you're calling someone a DEI hire, is actually
Tokenism. Yeah.
insulting to the hiring
Yeah.
manager. Like they're the one that made the decision.
Yes.
Um, but talking about how to build proactive pipelines. So here in the United States, the majority of the workforce by 2030 will be not white. So that is a reality. That is not something that's going to change. AI isn't going to automate all of our jobs, despite what we're thinking now. Human skills are going to be pretty dang important, especially if robots are making a lot of decisions.
Yeah.
And just the
They'll be
pipe.
even more important. That was one thing to do, the actual human interaction,
Mhm. Way
in
more
real life,
important.
but actually emotion type stuff is going to be even more important.
Way more important. And the workforce is just going to look very different. Gen Z is unwavering with their expectation on diversity and inclusion. They will not even apply for a job if your leadership team looks very non-diverse. And they will say, I have choices. I have choices that previous generations didn't, and they are going to be the majority of our workforce in a few years. So get ready now or play catch up later. But really thinking about intentional hiring practices, how to diversify and broaden your sources for recruiting, how to structure interviews with objective criteria so that we are weeding out, trying to minimize as much bias as we can. One of the stats I found that was, I thought, hilarious is that most people hire people that they want to spend time with outside of work. They want to go to lunch with. And it's like, well, that's great, to have a buddy, but does that mean they can do the job, right? And so
Yeah.
this like me bias, we're all fighting it, right? We're all fighting. I fight those headwinds. I love, people that went to my university. I love, people that have similar interests to me, but that's not the most effective worker. And so we really just need to get more diligent in our hiring, recruiting, promotion processes, to make sure that we're really using clear criteria.
Yeah, I think that it's also particularly something to be aware of on internal promotion, but that whole sort of thing where you you can definitely sort of see that certain people might be earmarked in a certain way, or recognizing that they've got the right look, or people judge and therefore their cards are marked positively or negatively. So being genuinely objective about whether they're performing in every way in terms of doing the level of the job that needs to be done, and also behaviors. So having objective internal promotion succession approach is really, really key too,
Yeah.
certainly.
Yeah, one of the studies, Hewlett Packard did this many years ago. I found that we judge men based on potential and women based on actual performance, and this translates into disability, neurodivergence, other diversity dimensions. But it's kind of like, oh, they're a go-getter, they'll figure it out because they look like other leaders and behave like other leaders. And the more different you are from the current leadership, the more people are like, I don't know if they
Yeah.
fit. I can't put my finger on it, but they've done it once. Could they do it again? And so this little doubt that we have is what holds historically marginalized groups back in the workplace and advances the status quo. So
Yes.
we all have to get better at recognizing that.
Yeah, the fact you've not seen anyone do it before, people can't quite perceive that it's possible.
Yeah.
Just going back one thing before we kind of conclude and wrap up, talking about the power, the thing of power, I'm sure you go into it in more detail in the book. And I know you've mentioned positional power, I guess, and influential power. For people listening, how could they think, or, reflect on the power that they have, or the types of power they might have?
Yeah, everyone has power. Everyone. And we often, if you don't think you do, most humans don't see it. I open up the book with like a parable about a fish in the water that can't see they're in the water, right? And that's what the workplace is like for all of us. It's like, oh, this is just normal. This is just like stuff I
Yeah.
have to deal with. This is just my context is everyone's context. And we're all swimming in very different conditions in this water. And so really just thinking about, are you heard? So just think about a meeting that you go to regularly, or think about a fictitious meeting. What voices are heard? What voices are interrupted? Who gets to make decisions? Who doesn't get to make decisions? Who, if they kind of breathe life or support into something, the decision is swayed, right? So is that something you can do when you speak to people? Listen to when you're present. Are others not there that you could speak up for on their behalf? Are there people that you could mentor that are different from you? And so just kind of think about, what access points do you have for power? Of course, identity plays in. I'm a white, straight, cisgender, non-disabled woman. I've got a lot of privileged identities and a lot of
Yeah.
access points for power with that. But it goes beyond that, like thinking about who who do we see as a leader? And if you're seen as a leader, even not positional, but just by social influence in the organization, what an awesome time to advocate for others that don't have that same proxy to power.
Just, do you know, it's only mentioned in my head that, you know how you see sort of teen movies like the Mean Girls or or whatever it might be. It's actually, there's a lot of people who have that kind of, the people who follow, and if they're nice. I remember a head teacher once saying that the difference in their year 6 classes all came down to the alpha males, whether they were troublemakers or hard workers, and that made a massive difference to the sort of culture of that class and the learning
Yeah.
of it. So it is that kind of, are you using your power for, especially if you have, you probably have more power than you realize, but are you using it for good,
Yeah.
um, in terms of the bigger picture, or restricting and negative, or reinforcing these negatives by not speaking up, or
Yeah.
not kind of putting your arm around the person that's that bit different.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's funny you brought up Mean Girls. I watched that with my daughter recently, and there's mean girl culture or mean people culture. It's not a girl gender
Yeah,
thing, but you're right. When you have toxic behavior modeled at the top,
it's
it's
all in groups and out
absolutely
group, isn't it, and all that sort of thing. Yes, and that makes
it's
all the difference. And if you have
contagious.
someone, yeah, the moral of the story often on these sort of ones is the mean girl gets left, and the left out person kind of, oh, it's Greece or something, isn't it? Which that's all a bit naff. But I mean, the concept is of actually being inclusive from the start. That would be so nice.
Yeah,
Not having to have that. And
yeah,
I will say often, even going back to the school analogy, often the people who, it's going full circle here, often the people who are the mean ones, the bullies, have the lowest self-esteem or lowest self-awareness, and they're doing it because they have fear of not being relevant or not having the power, and they don't really feel secure in it. So, uh,
yep,
yeah, if people stepping into it really is an interesting thing.
yeah.
Um, Julie, if people want to listen to your podcast, read your books, obviously we'll put links in the show notes, but do you want to just highlight how people can find you, particularly seeing
Yeah.
as what you're posting on LinkedIn may not be as visible as it was previously?
Yeah, find me on LinkedIn, seriously, please. Kratz, Kratz, Julie Kratz. And super easy to find my book and a ton of free resources. We have free training programs, all sorts of fun stuff you can tap into at nextpivotpoint.com. So nextpivotpoint.com, you can find the book We Want You, an allyship guide for people with power. You can find our Allyship in Action podcast, and also a free training for your team. So we'd love to see you
Fabulous.
over there.
Brilliant. That's perfect. Thank you, Julie. Really lovely to have you on the podcast again. And yeah, wish you lots of luck carrying on fighting the good fight over there.
Thank you. It was
All
such a
right.
pleasure.
I really hope you found this week's episode useful and enjoyable. If you did, perhaps you could recommend us to a friend or colleague, or give us a review on your platform of choice. It really helps new listeners to find us. Now, you can access links to any of the information mentioned in this show via the website www.hruprising.com. Further free resources are also available at www.actus.co.uk. There you can also find out more about our software and training solutions. Finally, why not join our LinkedIn group, the HR Uprising, to share ideas and collaborate with other like-minded people professionals. Thank you for listening to the HR Uprising podcast.
This episode was brought to you by Disruptive Media, helping bold entrepreneurs stand out through podcasting, video, and social content. Visit disruptivemedia.co.uk to learn more.